Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am Megan Frederick, a marketer at Perficient. I'll be moderating today's webinar on cognitive virtual agents and how to deliver cognitive customer service with IBM Watson. We are recording today, and we will send you an email with information on how to access this after the session. Time permitting, we will answer questions at the end of the presentation. So if you do have questions, please type those in the chat box in the bottom left of your screen. In a moment, I'll hand it over to our speakers, but first I'd like to give you a quick overview of Perficient and introduce our speakers. Perficient is a leading digital transformation consulting firm serving enterprise customers throughout North America. We are focused on delivering digital experience, business optimization, and industry solutions. Founded in 1997, we're a public company with more than 3,000 employees. We form strategic partnerships with all of the major technology vendors and also have dedicated solutions and industry practices. One of our practice areas features IBM Watson and cognitive solutions. We have consultants dedicated to our AI practice, and we are an accredited partner with IBM and Watson Solutions. We have a close relationship with the IBM Watson team, and last year we were presented with the IBM Beacon Award for an outstanding Watson cognitive solution, which was actually the only award they gave for cognitive solutions. Our speakers today are Christine Livingston and Chris Damaris. Christine is the IBM Watson Practice Director at Perficient. She leads our team of Watson subject matter experts and closely works with IBM to deliver outstanding Watson solutions across industries. And Chris Damaris is a product manager for Watson Assistant at IBM. So to kick off the webinar today, we'd like to start with a quick polling question to see where everyone is on their path to adopting and implementing cognitive solutions. So please select the option that best applies to your organization. I'll give everyone a moment to answer. Adoption of artificial intelligence and cognitive solutions has really grown and kind of become a part of the mainstream technology strategies. And a lot of early AI adoption actually lies within the realm of customer service experience as organizations are seeking to lower costs and shift cost priorities elsewhere. So we're really interested in sort of seeing where you are, and this will kind of help us drive the conversation today. All right, it looks like everyone's kind of put in their answers. So it looks like the majority of everyone who's joined the webinar today are exploring chatbots. So this will be a really great presentation for you today. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about intelligent virtual agents and how you can implement this for your company. So thanks for participating. Now I'll turn it over to Christine and she'll begin the presentation.
Thanks, Megan. So as Megan mentioned, we'll just start by talking a little bit about the trend toward virtual agents and where we see customer service with self-service playing a role in your call centers. We'll talk a little bit about the differentiation between a simple chatbot and an intelligent virtual agent, as well as some nuances to training these virtual agents, and then we'll dig a little bit more specifically into the Watson Assistant offering. So as Megan mentioned, we have partnerships with all of the major vendors, IBM, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and I run our artificial intelligence practice. We cover all these platforms and are here specifically talking today about IBM Watson Assistant and its role in the call center. So there's just some interesting statistics here from Gartner and Forrester around virtual agents. And if you look at some of these are really as early as this year, that already 50% of organizations have invested in some sort of virtual agent if they realize advantages of automated self-service. And interestingly, by next year, it's estimated that 20% of brands will abandon their mobile apps in favor of messaging platforms, which are typically driven by intelligent virtual agents behind the scenes. And that by 2020, over 85% of your relationship to a customer will be managed without human interaction at all. And then by the time we get to about 2020, it's estimated 2022 that 25% of customer service support operations will integrate virtual agent technology throughout the entire engagement lifecycle. And 40% of customer-facing employees and government workers will consult AI for decision support. So we really see, again, self-service channels as being the key to that customer experience. That customer service is really important and critical today. And the typical reasons that businesses are choosing these self-service channels are for call deflection and cost reduction purposes. And customers really favor self-service because they get immediate service and answers to their questions. So we really see this as being particularly important today as the amount of information is growing very quickly. And it's a huge amount of that is unstructured. And at the same time that the information you have that's unstructured is growing, you also have customers looking for a very relevant personal engagement, looking for them to specifically answer their questions as though you know them on an individual level. So we see cognitive as really being this advantage to help bridge the gap and enhance the overall customer experience. So one of the key things to think about when you look at cognitive and virtual agents is the way that they process and interpret structured and unstructured data. So structured data, we all know how to interpret, how to digest, how to leverage in analytics. It's things that are very easily classified and quantified, things you can put into columns and rows. Unstructured data is much more difficult to organize using these traditional mechanisms that doesn't easily fit into our databases or our Excel spreadsheets. But this is really where a wealth of information lies. This is where we'll typically explain what's happening, and this is how we engage the world around us. So unstructured data, though, is inherently challenging to understand in a programmatic way. And when you look at unstructured information, you have to look at more than keyword evidence to really understand the intent or the purpose of the question and be able to provide a relevant answer. So if you look at this Jeopardy question back all the way to the roots of Watson Assistant, if we look at the question that says in May 1898, Portugal celebrated the 400th anniversary of this explorer's arrival in India, and we go looking for answers and we see a passage maybe that says in May, Gary arrived in India after he celebrated his anniversary in Portugal. We can see that from a keyword perspective, this is a great match. It's both talking about celebrations, the month of May, anniversaries, the same countries of Portugal and India. But we know inherently that the answer that Gary is the explorer we're looking for is incorrect. Gary did not arrive in India. He's not the explorer that we're looking for. So we have to teach our computers to understand and process unstructured information the same way that people do. So when you look at what Watson does, it's able to take temporal reasoning to understand that the 400th anniversary of 1898 is equivalent to May 1498. And we can use statistical paraphrasing to know that landing somewhere implies arriving somewhere. And geospatial reasoning will tell you that Kapad Beach is in India. Therefore, if I have arrived in Kapad Beach, I have also arrived in India. And we can come up with a much more correct conclusion that Vasco da Gama is the explorer that we're looking for. And if you look at those two passages from a keyword perspective, the only keyword they share in common is the month of May. So you would never find this answer taking a traditional keyword search approach. You really have to understand the intent and the meaning behind that statement in order to provide a relevant, appropriate answer. So cognitive agents are an interesting intersection of this technology and machine learning. So how do we process unstructured information and apply machine learning in a relevant way? And there's a very broad spectrum of chatbots. So I typically like to distinguish a more scripted, simple chatbot conversation from a cognitive conversation driven by an intelligent virtual agent. So a scripted conversation is really recreating your IVR experience, that touch tone decision tree, within a text form. And really it's still driven then by a predefined conversation flow. You're still looking for very specific words or phrases at each branch in your decision tree and still really functions best on structured data. So this is really where you're looking for, hi, are you calling about your flight to Denver? And if I say no, that's all that this chatbot will understand. And it will take me to the next branch in its tree. An intelligent virtual agent could understand an entire statement where I said, no, I'm not talking about my flight to Denver, I'm talking about my flight to Detroit, and can understand the entire statement and progress accordingly because they're trained to understand conversational intent rather than driven by an expected conversational flow. you can train them to understand natural language in that same way we're looking at Jeopardy questions so that they can really understand the intent or the meaning behind a statement to provide a relevant answer. Intelligent virtual agents will work on both structured and unstructured data. They don't need simple keywords or key phrases to understand what to do with the conversation. And they typically include some element of machine learning so that they can learn over time and are typically capable of a broader range of tasks. So when we look at what this looks like in the ecosystem from a very conceptual perspective, typically these intelligent virtual agents have some ability to, again, manage the conversation and the dialogue, and then they're sending the utterances to a natural language processing engine to determine the intent of the statement. And then you've got some orchestration layer that's communicating back and forth with your systems of record to provide that personalized engagement that people are looking for, so you can pull information about their account, who they are as an individual, and influence your conversation and your interaction with them accordingly. And the pieces that your team would train specifically are that conversational understanding of intent and the knowledge base, really where is your virtual agent going to go look and retrieve answers from. So when we look at the distribution of questions that typically virtual agents are trained for, we can break them up into what are considered short tail and long tail questions. So most of your consumer interactions are probably living on the left-hand side of this curve, meaning they're very frequently asked, but they're not very complex to answer. So you can typically answer the question using the context of the question itself fairly easily. As you progress to the right-hand side of this curve, the questions are not as complicated to answer, or they're more complicated to answer, not as frequently asked, much more unique, intense, more complicated customer service interactions. So typically we recommend that you build these virtual agents moving from left to right as you expand upon the knowledge base or the questions that they're trained to answer and provide engagement on. This is Forrester's perspective on conversational computing platforms. As I mentioned, we cover the primary vendors, and IBM Watson, you'll see, is the highest ranked vendor by Forrester in the conversational computing platform wave as of Q2 2018. And so another commonly asked question when we talk about virtual agents is really, how do we train this agent? What does that look like? What does an actual implementation entail? So we can talk about some specific vocabulary terms when we get into the virtual agent world that are important to understand. So as you and I exchange dialogue back and forth, each sentence we exchange would be considered an utterance. So if someone says, I need to add my daughter to my auto policy, that statement is a single utterance. Deciding what the purpose of that utterance is called the intent. So the intent of this statement is to add a driver to a policy. And then you need to pull out the specific entities or the nouns that we're acting upon. So here we're talking about a daughter as being the person or the object that we're adding to an auto policy, which is, again, the object we're acting on. And when you deploy virtual agents, it's important to look for platforms that allow you to do both intent and entity training. So intent training would look something similar to this, where you would provide representative questions or training sets of the various ways your customers might express an intent to add a driver. So they may say something like, I need to add my daughter to my auto policy, my son just turned 16, I need to add him to my policy, I have to update my policy to include my nanny. Those would all be training sets or training utterances you would provide to your platform, all for the intent of add driver. Once you've gone through your training cycles, you would then expose this virtual agent to new information, to your test set, where it's similar but not quite phrased the same, and you evaluate how well your virtual agent understands the test data. So this might be something like saying, please add my son, or make sure my account covers my twins also. And so it's a continual training test cycle until your virtual agent is sufficiently trained to respond for the interactions or the intent that you are training it for. Entity training is very similar in that, again, you work on a training and a test set, but this time you're looking for specific variations in, again, that object that we're acting on. And there's some interesting things here. So if we train this to distinguish perhaps a home policy from an auto policy, you might want to just describe those policies different ways. And there's also a notion of inference, where the second statement down says my son just turned 16 and I need to add him to my policy. So from this statement, you can infer that this may be a new driver who just got their license. So therefore, we're probably talking about automotive insurance and the auto policy rather than my home or my life. And again, you would then expose your test set new data to evaluate how well your virtual agent is identifying these entities specifically. So I move into the realm of Watson Assistant. Watson Assistant is IBM's conversational computing platform driving those intelligent virtual agent interactions, able to distinguish and interpret natural language and execute actions accordingly. So Watson as an overall platform is a variety of APIs or building blocks that provide cognitive computing capabilities to your organization. And they can be broken up or classified along the lines of language, speech, empathy, knowledge, vision, and AI assistance. And AI assistance obviously falls in that box. And there's also some overlap back and forth between these capabilities that Watson pulls into the Watson Assistant platform. So there's really three primary use cases for Watson Assistant. We're talking specifically about customer care today. This is really seen typically as a call deflection opportunity, a cost savings initiative where you can overall improve your customer experience while reducing your call center costs. You can also expose that same capability internally, so providing internal employee productivity improvements, providing answers to their questions, providing, again, that same virtual agent capacity, just trained differently for your internal employees. And then finally, the third primary usage pattern that we've seen for Watson Assistant is creating this conversational commerce. Or think about it like that guided, intelligent shopping experience where you're able to understand someone's preferences, likes, dislikes, and recommend relevant or similar products to them. And so I'm going to go ahead and just hand the conversation over to Chris from IBM to speak about some of their recently released features and some things that may be new and coming with the IBM Watson platform.
Thanks, Christine. Yeah, so this slide is essentially an overview of some recently launched features that we have. I'll walk through kind of each of them and then the use cases that we'll try to solve. So as Christine mentioned, the building blocks of what we have within Watson Assistant are building out the intents and the entities, and then as well connecting those together to build out the dialogue flow. So based off of what the user's saying, you own and control where your users are going in the conversation. And so the features that we build, essentially we try to address first the time to value that you have, trying to really shorten what it takes to build out a conversational system, and then secondly, shortening the time it takes to maintain one of these systems as well. So you'll see that each of these features will revolve around those two problems that we see in the market. So this first one is something called digressions. So the example here is if you're in the middle of ordering a pizza from a chatbot, and they say, what toppings do you want? And the user comes back and they say, well, what toppings do you have? So it's not exactly the question you're expecting, but you're able to handle that question that's on topic, but not in that direct flow, and they say, we offer sausage and peppers. And then after handling that flow, come back to what the user was ordering, so ordering the pizza. So it really enables more fluid conversations than just a very rigid back and forth with the user. Secondly is our response type. So it's always recommended that if your UI allows it, to provide some better response types than just text for the user, helping to guide the conversation. So within the tooling now, you can provide buttons, different videos, pauses, and so on back to your end user so they have better guide on what they need to provide back to the bot as input. The third thing is it's called dialog folders, just a way to more easily organize your information, as well as we have this concept of context variables to where your bot is constantly passing back information with your application that you're building. So knowing the name of the user and so on. Different information like that you're passing back and forth between your app and the chatbot. And so this feature just makes it easy to set that directly within our tooling. The fifth and sixth recently released features are only in our premium plan. They're a little bit more advanced. So within this fifth one, it helps you define any conflicts that you have between your intents, because it's easy sometimes to build intents, again, just the purpose behind what someone's saying, that are very close to one another. That could just have a single word difference, and that's very hard for a machine to pick up the difference. So this feature enables you to easily find the differences between, or easily find the sentences that are very similar and then resolve those. The sixth one is another best practice in terms of conversational pattern. So disambiguation, if your bot is confused between multiple intents, it will offer up multiple suggestions. So the user says, I want to open an account, and you say, did you mean open up a banking account, open up a checking account? Because they have multiple options that they can do, you want to prompt multiple things because the user was vague in their expression. So this feature enables you to easily author that across your chatbot. The seventh thing is allowing contextual entities. So an example here is if you have a product catalog that is very large, and it's tough to bring in every single value that the user can say in their example, you instead just define where that value appears in a sentence, and then it can automatically detect where or what that entity is, what those products are in your catalog, just using the context of the sentence. And number 8 is another thing that helps to build entities, just recommending different synonyms. And then this last piece is around managing the lifecycle of a bot, because in a lot of ways it is like managing a development environment. So we're working on more features that make it easy to carry across some development practices. Things like being able to review your content or what users are saying in your development environment so that you're not affecting anything in your production environment. So those are some of the things that we recently launched, and we have another release that we're expecting up in October with some new exciting things. Keep your heads up for that as well. But yeah, any questions you may have on these features, feel free to ask it on the Q&A. And if you go to the next slide.
Thanks, Chris. So Chris and I will just talk a little bit about some of the success stories that we've had within both Perficient and IBM. So at Perficient, we've worked with a North American software provider to create a digital concierge for them. This company was looking to really recreate their customer experience, and they were previously going back and forth for some software activation and maintenance tasks over email, and we're looking to create some new self-service options. So by deploying an IBM Watson Assistant solution, they were able to really recreate that user experience, offer new self-service options that they were not previously offering to their consumers. And that virtual agent was able to autonomously handle over 60% of their Tier 1 requests upon that initial release. And they were able to reduce their support costs overall by about 90% and resolve their customers' questions 99% shorter. It's taking about a day and a half to provide answers to their questions and resolve these customer service issues prior to releasing this virtual agent. And once the agent was deployed, they were able to respond and answer questions within a matter of minutes. We've also worked with a major health insurer who actually integrated a virtual agent into their IVR system. And this cognitive agent is able to converse with providers to verify benefits. So to provide information, Christine is coming in for an MRI. Is she covered for this procedure? When providers call in to this insurer, they're actually able to converse with an IBM Watson Assistant platform integrated into the IVR to provide answers to those inquiries, and it's able to provide those answers autonomously. So dramatically changed a previously fairly tedious IVR system. They were able to reduce their average handle time from 8 minutes down to about 3. And I think also very interesting is they had a the people dramatically reduced as well. And so I'll hand it over to Chris to talk about 2 additional successes on the Watson Assistant platform.
Thanks. Yeah, so I just have 2 more examples to go through. This first one is with Bradesco, which is a large bank in Brazil. So they have a chatbot that's in Brazilian Portuguese. It's handling roughly 300,000 questions every month. And essentially what this bot does is it helps provide support for call center agents. So when the agents are getting a call in, they can ask questions to this bot. If they aren't sure on various products, they can just ask the bot any questions and then provide the answer back to the agents themselves, or back to the users themselves. So with this, the chatbot is achieving an accuracy rate of 95%, which is very high. And the scale of it is pretty impressive because they have this trained across 62 different products. And each of those products has its own unique questions, various different nuances that they have to answer amongst those products. And they're using this across 5,200 branches within the bank. Then the next example that I have is with Royal Bank of Scotland. And so they have a very interesting conversational use case where essentially they're helping with customer support. It's a chatbot that they have on their bank's website that you can pull up a little chat widget and chat with Cora. And they're seeing about 50% deflection rate. And they were seeing this rate about a few months into building this out. So they're able to see a lot of cost savings because the agents are spending less and less time with users because the chatbot can handle the simpler queries that they're providing. And one thing that's very interesting about RBS is they found that they didn't have to create a lot of new content within this chatbot because so much content that they had already existed somewhere on their website. It was just tough for their users to find. And so Cora provided an easy way for users to quickly find what exactly they're looking for that was already on the website. So it's a good example of taking advantage of what they had already in order to provide an easier and better experience for their customers. I think that's all we have for you guys today. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to text these into the chat box. And then Christine, did you want to close with anything?
I'll interject real quick. Yeah, let's give them a moment. Again, as Chris said, if you have any questions, type them in the chat box to the left, on the bottom left of your screen. And Chris, Christine, if there's anything else maybe you'd like to add while we wait, maybe talk about other use cases or like if there's demos that they could see, they can look up.
Yep, so if you're interested in exploring really what a cognitive virtual agent may do for your enterprise, feel free to reach out. We'll have some information come out as a follow-up, but we'd love to show you a demonstration. A lot of times that will really make the power of the platform come to life as you see it operating and working in a real-world scenario where you can see things like answering call volumes or call questions by different policy types and pulling in specific customer information to that dialogue as well.
Okay, it looks like we have a question. Is there a minimum call volume that makes implementing something like this worthwhile?
So it really ranges. Typically I would look at it more as your cost to handle a call. So typically if your cost per call is, this is a very rough figure, but over $1.75 to $2 per call, then it's typically a worthwhile endeavor. So it's because I've seen customers who have, not a high call volume, but a very complex scenario where it takes a very long time and they need to have highly specialized agents. So I would look at it more from potentially your cost per transaction or interaction perspective. But typically it does work better in higher volume scenarios.
All right. Well, it doesn't look like I have any other questions coming through in the chat window. Christine and Chris, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to make before I wrap things up?
We look forward to exploring artificial intelligence and the possibility of virtual agents with you.
And same with me. Thanks for your time. And if you have any questions, I'm sure we'll have some contact information here on the Follow Us Online page slide, this next slide. But thanks for your time.
I encourage you to follow Perficient's team online as we have new information added daily. You can visit Perficient.com and click on the Insights tab for blogs, white papers, and upcoming webinars. We also have a guide around demystifying IBM Watson and the power of cognitive solutions that you can read as a follow-up to today's discussion. Again, thank you for joining us today. Within the next few days, we will share a link to the recording, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you. Bye.